Jamie Green is the transport spokesman for the Scottish Conservatives. They've backed the plan to cut the ADT. He joins us now from Edinburgh. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Gary.
And is that still your position? If Labour force this vote, will you support it or reject it?
It's still our position. I'm actually quite pleased that Labour brought this to the Parliament this week because, like them, I'm very keen to hear what the Scottish Government have to say about this. They made an explicit manifesto promise to do this. I listened to your clip with John Swinney earlier, and I have to say, for the first time, I agree with everything he said.
So ultimately, you want to see the Scottish Government to stick with this plan to cut the tax. But of course, we had this declaration of a climate emergency from Nicola Sturgeon and a pledge to look at all areas of legislation that might be affected by this. So it would look on the face of it as though this particular policy is going to be ditched.
I think that would be a real shame. I mean, if you look at the Scottish Government's own website, they actually explain the reason why they want to make this cut. It's going to boost connectivity, it's going to improve our economic competitiveness as a country and encourage new routes between Scotland and other countries to improve tourism and inward business investment. Those are the right things to do at this time in terms of where we're at as a country.
What about the environment?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you know, look, are Labour suggesting that we're going to cap the amount of airplanes in the sky? I mean, we're actually losing routes at the moment because we're not making this cut. And I think that's putting Scotland at a disadvantage. I'd like to see the SNP, and it's a shame Derek Mackay wouldn't come on your show this morning to explain why he's not fulfilling his own manifesto promise, the promise that the SNP made to the tourist community, to the business community and to Scotland, that we will make Scotland a competitive place to do business. Why aren't they doing that?
But also at the same time, when you look at the environment, government has a responsibility here in terms of trying to get people to change their habits, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's a very good point, which is why our proposals for making reductions in passenger tax were actually to long-haul flights where there really is no alternative. And the point there is that would open up markets such as Asia, the Middle East, the Americas, the growing economies that we need to be doing business with. So, you know, I think there's a fair point to be made. There are land alternatives for travelling within the UK and to an extent within Europe. So that's why the Scottish Conservatives proposals want to make a cut where it's targeted at actually benefiting the economy whilst being sympathetic to the notion that we do need to be making lifestyle changes to improve the environment.
Labour's argument, though, is that by going down the route that you're suggesting, then what you're offering is a tax cut to the wealthiest in society. Those who can afford to fly to Asia or the Middle East long haul. These are the people who actually can afford to pay an extra tax.
Yeah, I mean, Labour are all over the place on this policy. The idea and this notion that you only fly if you're rich, well, I'd like to hear what your listeners think about that. I mean, flying has become far more accessible. It's become far more environmentally friendly.
But to go to the long-haul destinations that you've suggested, you do need to have cash.
Well, you need to have cash, but we're also talking about inward investment here. I mean, planes hopefully are full in both directions. We want to bring in plane loads of businessmen, of investors, of tourists into Scotland. I mean, I'm sitting in the Edinburgh studio. We would not survive without that inward traffic of people into Edinburgh Airport. So, I mean, you know, this notion that this is a tax cut for the rich, well, Labour's narrative is not surprising.
But it's interesting.
But it's not the right way to approach this.
It's interesting you mentioned Edinburgh Airport. I mean, each month it seems that the airport trumpets the fact that there had another growth in passenger numbers. Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem at the moment, with this tax in place, that it is a disincentive to flying.
Well, it is a disincentive. We know this directly from the airlines. I speak to airlines on a regular basis.
Well, they would say that, wouldn't they? But ultimately the facts don't bear it out. As I said to you,
they do.
Edinburgh Airport continually tells us that their numbers are increasing.
Well, numbers are increasing as demand to travel is increasing, but the numbers do stack up. I mean, if you look at the ticket prices on some of these destinations, you know, the tax element of it is a substantial part of it. We've already lost airlines like Norwegian, for example, who were running transatlantic flights where the margins are very slim.
Well, they're having their own difficulties, though.
Well, but this is a low-cost model where the margins are extremely slim, and the air departure tax element of it is such a substantial part of the ticket price, and that is a specific reason why they have pulled out of certain routes into Scotland. And I think that's a real shame. That's to the detriment of Edinburgh and to Scotland as an economy.
How do you replace the lost revenue? We heard there from Colin Smith from Labour talking about £300 million being lost to the Scottish Government's coffers if this tax is scrapped altogether.
Well, there have been numerous and many independent reports into the wider benefits of reducing air departure duty.
But the bottom line is there would be a shortfall in terms of the cash available to the Scottish Government in the first instance.
Well, absolutely. I mean,
so how do you replace that?
There's an immediate shortfall into the Treasury in terms of taxation. But in terms of the wider economic upside of this, in terms of growth and GVA, some estimates put it around £200 million per year, which is far greater than the tax loss that we've done analysis on. So I think actually if you look at it on the balance of the whole, we're looking at creating job opportunities, boosting tourism and boosting inward business investment in Scotland. And I think in the balance of the whole over time, the intake to the Scottish economy is far greater than the loss of the revenue from making the tax cut itself. So I think, this is something we shouldn't be afraid of. This is the right thing to do. The Scottish Government said it was the right thing to do. The SNP think it's the right thing to do. I want them to get on with it.
Thanks for joining us this morning. Jamie Green, Transport spokesman for the Scottish Conservatives.